Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, November 15, 2023. President Joe Biden meets with Chinese President Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Conference in California. President Biden saying we have to ensure that competition does not veer into conflict. Critical global challenges we face, from climate change to counternarcotics to artificial intelligence, demand our joint efforts. And President Xi saying for two large countries like China and the United States, turning their backs on each other is not an option. Planet Earth is big enough for the two countries to succeed. In Washington, the U.S. House of Representatives starts its Thanksgiving recess early after 19 Republicans vote no on a procedural vote that would have allowed debate on one of the 12 annual spending bills, joining all the Democrats and defeating that motion. It's not the first time this has happened this year with a narrow House Republican majority. While in the Senate, they're working on the temporary full government funding extension that the House has already passed. That's a bill that needs to be signed into law by Friday at midnight to avoid a government shutdown. We'll talk about all this with Washington Examiner Congressional reporter Cami Mundo. Senate today also voting on a bill that would overturn President Biden's latest income-driven student loan repayment plan. The House Homeland Security Committee holds a hearing on worldwide threats with testimony from the FBI Director Christopher Wray and Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. And in Great Britain, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is asked about his naming former Prime Minister David Cameron to be new Foreign Secretary. From the New York Times, there's this: as President Biden meets President Xi Jinping of China in California on Wednesday, his primary goal will be simple: find a way to avoid an increasingly bitter competition with China from tipping into conflict. For two leaders who have agreed on very little as their nations have spiraled into their worst relationship in 4 decades, there have been hints of how they will try to nudge toward the appearance of agreement. A senior administration official said they're expected to reach the outline of an agreement that would commit Beijing to regulating components of fentanyl, the drug that has driven a devastating opioid epidemic in the United States. They are expected to announce a forum for discussion on how to keep artificial intelligence programs away from nuclear command and control. At the same moment, the U.S. is denying China the advanced chips it needs to develop and train AI programs. And they will probably discuss resuming military-to-military communications, which China cut off after then-Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan last year. That was from the New York Times. The two leaders met in Woodside, California, about 25 miles south of San Francisco, where the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Conference is being held. Here is President Biden, followed by President Xi.
Well, Mr. President, it's good to see you again. We've spent many hours together over the last 10 or 12 years, and to host you in the United States is a great honor and a pleasure, particularly as it relates to our summit today and for the APEC leaders meeting this week. Look, this time of year, about a year and a day ago, we met in Bali on the sidelines of the G20. Since then, key members of our teams have had important discussions on issues matters to both our nations and to the world. But as always, there is no substitute to face-to-face discussions. I've always found our discussions straightforward and frank, and I've always appreciated them. Mr. President, we know each other for a long time. We haven't always agreed, which was not a surprise to anyone, but our meetings have always been candid, straightforward, and useful. I've never doubted what you've told me in terms of your candid nature in which you speak. I value our conversation because I think it's paramount that you and I understand each other clearly, leader to leader, with no misconceptions or miscommunication. We have to ensure that competition does not veer into conflict. And we also have to manage it responsibly, that competition. That's what the United States wants and what we intend to do. I also believe that's what the world wants for both of us, candid exchange. We also have a responsibility to our people and the work in the world to work together when we see it in our interest to do so. And the critical global challenges we face, from climate change to counternarcotics to artificial intelligence, demand our joint efforts. So I look forward to beginning this discussion, and I welcome you, and the floor is yours, Mr. President. And again, welcome back.
Mr. President, good morning. Coming here, I think of your trip to China. When I was the Vice President of China, we had a meeting. It was 12 years ago. I still remember our interactions very vividly, and it always gives me a lot of thoughts. Last time we met in Bali, you said it was a year and a day ago. A lot has happened since then. The world has emerged from the COVID pandemic, but is still under its tremendous impacts. The global economy is recovering, but its momentum remains sluggish. Industrial and supply chains are still under the threat of interruption, and protectionism is rising. All these are grave problems. The China-US relationship, which is the most important bilateral relationship in the world, should be perceived and envisioned in a broad context of the accelerating global transformations unseen in a century. It should develop in a way that benefits our two peoples and fulfills our responsibility for human progress. China-US relationship has never been smooth sailing over the past 50 years or more, and it always faces problems of one kind or another. Yet it has kept moving forward amid twists and turns. For two large countries like China and the United States, turning their back on each other is not an option. It is unrealistic for one side to remodel the other, and conflict and confrontation has unbearable consequences for both sides. I'm still of the view that major country competition is not the prevailing trend of current times and cannot solve the problems facing China and the United States or the world at large. Planet Earth is big enough for the two countries to succeed, and one country's success is an opportunity for the other. It is an objective fact that China and the United States are different in history, culture, social system, and development path. However, as long as they respect each other, coexist in peace, and pursue win-win cooperation, they will be fully capable of rising above differences and find the right way for the two major countries to get along with each other. I firmly believe in the promising future of the bilateral relationship. Mr. President, you and I, we are at the helm of China-US relations. We shoulder heavy responsibilities for the two peoples, for the world, and for history. I look forward to having an in-depth exchange of views and reaching new understandings with you on strategic and overarching issues critical to the direction of China-US relations and on major issues affecting world peace and development. I wish to thank you for your thoughtful arrangements for our meeting today and for our participation at the APEC meeting. Thank you.
President Joe Biden and through an interpreter, Chinese President Xi Jinping not taking any reporters' questions. Their opening statement before their bilateral meeting in Woodside, California, that's just south of San Francisco, where the APEC meeting is happening, Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. And they met at a historic country house and museum that has been in a number of movies and TV shows, according to reports. Ahead of today's meeting, Axios reports the U.S. and China agreed Tuesday night to jointly tackle aspects of human-caused climate change, including the promotion of renewable energy technologies. The agreement marks the next level of bilateral engagement on climate between the world's two biggest emitters. The article goes on. It includes language stating the two countries will pursue efforts to triple renewable energy capacity globally by 2030, which could ease the adoption of that goal at the upcoming COP28 climate summit in Dubai. The separately issued statements lack a commitment from China to stop approving new coal-fired power plants, a key U.S. concern based on carbon emissions. That from Axios. In Washington, D.C., This morning, Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell spoke on the Senate floor about President Biden's meeting with President Xi.
1 year ago, President Biden met for the first time with President Xi, the head of the Chinese Communist Party, and he pledged that the United States would compete vigorously with the PRC. 1 year later, the president and the chairman will meet again today. So let's take stock of whether the Biden administration is living up to its pledge of vigorous competition. The stakes of this competition simply cannot be overstated. The Chinese military is outpacing us in pivotal military capabilities like hypersonics, precise long-range fires, and even naval vessels. Beijing has secured a commanding share of the rare minerals necessary to create critical supply. Chinese agents are engaged in an aggressive effort to steal sensitive Western technologies and government secrets, and the PRC consistently signals its disdain for national sovereignty, human rights, and the free flow of commerce. In other words, strategic competition with China is going to determine the course of the next century of American history. And yet, the Biden administration has too often met this historic moment with weakness and naivete, time and time again, and has sacrificed competition on the altar of green climate policy. In the administration's quest to turn the American automobile industry electric, it has apparently made peace with sending American tax dollars to the Chinese industries that dominate battery-making input. In pursuit of grand climate diplomacy, the administration's envoys have been literally laughed out of Beijing by a state that keeps on increasing its carbon emissions and has no plan to start cutting them literally for years. And meanwhile, the consequences of the Biden administration's neglect for American hard power are only getting more dangerous. The PRC is acquiring new weapons as much as 6 times faster than the United States, and for each of the past 2 years, it announced a 7% increase in military spending. But even as the president's national defense strategy identifies China as the pacing threat, his defense budget requests haven't even kept up with inflation. Chairman Xi has gone out of his way to align closely with fellow adversaries of the West, stepping up joint military exercises with Putin's forces and helping both Moscow and Tehran endure Western sanctions. China has made military competition with the West a top priority. We can't afford to ignore this challenge.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, on the Senate floor in Washington as President Biden out in California did meet today with the Chinese President Xi Jinping at the APEC summit. The president's schedule also includes a news conference this Wednesday night, and then he and the First Lady host a welcome reception for the APEC leaders. On Thursday, the president will deliver remarks at the APEC CEO summit and have an informal dialogue and working lunch, according to the White House. And then on Friday, there's a bilateral meeting with President Biden and the President of Mexico before there's the official formal transfer of the APEC chair to the next chair, who is the President of Peru. This is Washington Today. From the Washington Examiner, hardline House conservatives tanked progress on Republican spending plans on Wednesday in an act of retribution toward Speaker Mike Johnson after lawmakers advanced a clean continuing resolution under suspended rules the day before. The failed vote dealt a blow to Speaker Johnson's initial plan to advance at least 2 appropriations bills this week, prompting the Speaker to cancel votes for the rest of the week and send lawmakers home until November 28th. Leading the charge was Congressman Chip Roy, Republican from Texas, who was upset after Speaker Johnson's decision to pass a stopgap funding measure with no spending cuts or conservative policy riders attached under suspension of the rules. That was from the Washington Examiner. In a moment, we'll talk to the reporter who wrote that article. First, here is Congressman Chip Roy on the House floor after the rule to the spending bill was voted down when he and 18 other Republicans joined all the Democrats in voting no.
I didn't come here for second place. I didn't come here for more excuses. I didn't come here to have the Speaker of the House assume the position and in 17 days pass a continuing resolution off the floor of this House through suspension of the rules. $400 billion, including an extension of the Farm Bill that doesn't do anything about the Chinese Communist Party ownership of our lands. Doesn't do anything to protect small ag and to protect small ranchers from big ag and all of the big corporate adventures getting rich based on the policies from this body. When is it going to be enough? Is $34 trillion of debt not enough? $2 trillion deficits not enough? Another American dying from fentanyl or from cartels? Terrorists coming across our southern border not enough? Our babies being put in ovens in Israel not enough? We have the Senate yesterday who chose expansion of the Internal Revenue Service over standing with Israel. And what are my Republican colleagues doing? They are all too happy to have this vote go down today and get on their airplanes and go home for turkey at Thanksgiving. Why aren't we putting another bill on the floor of the House right now and sending it over to the Senate to shove it down their throats, to say that we Republicans stand for cutting spending? We Republicans stand for standing with Israel. We Republicans stand for securing the border of the United States. No, let's just go back and go raise some money so we can do more fundraisers, so we can then try to get elected, so we can come back here and offer more excuses for why we don't get the job done.
Congressman Chip Roy, Republican from Texas, on the House floor. Congressman Sean Casten, Democrat from Illinois, had a different take today, also on the House floor, about the passage of the federal government funding extension bill in the House on Tuesday, the spending bill rules for debate that were defeated today, and members of Congress going home early for Thanksgiving.
Next week, Americans across the country are going to gather around their dinner tables and share what they're thankful for. And I hope my Republican colleagues will use that moment to reflect on how lucky you are to work with us House Democrats. I hope you're thankful for that time last June when the Republicans were on the verge of driving us into an economic default and Democrats stepped up, helped you out, and provided the votes needed to make sure we didn't. I hope you're thankful for that time 45 days ago when you were driving us to the edge of an economic shutdown and once again Democrats stepped up, helped you out, and made sure we kept the government open for the American people. I hope you're thankful for that time this week when Democrats once again had to be the adults in the room, didn't throw any punches, but made sure that even though the Republican majority couldn't pass the new Speaker's stopgap measure, we did, and we kept the government open for a few more weeks. So this Thanksgiving, I'd ask all of you, be thankful, and whatever you do, just don't be that crazy uncle who won't stop yapping about Hunter Biden. Mr. Speaker, you're welcome, and I yield back.
Congressman Sean Casten, Democrat from Illinois, on the House floor. Cami Mondo, congressional reporter with the Washington Examiner, has been writing about the House's handling of spending bills and joins us now by phone. Thank you for being with us. I want to start with a post from NBC News reporter Garrett Haake. He writes, after Republicans defeat the rule on another GOP appropriations bill, Speaker Johnson returns to his office telling me, "We're not frustrated. This is part of the process, and we're working towards consensus, and I've been on the job for less than 3 weeks." He doesn't see this as a problem. What are you hearing from other members of Congress?
So aside from the 19 Republicans who did vote down on the rule today, a lot of them have been repeating kind of that same line that Speaker Johnson has inherited a problem that he didn't construct. And so they're kind of saying with the CR yesterday and with these appropriations bills that aren't getting much momentum on the floor, they're saying these aren't his proposals. And so the failure to get enough Republican support on these isn't his fault, that he might just need a bit more time, considering he's only been in this top position for about 3 weeks. So for those who didn't vote down the rule, that is something that they're also saying, that just give Johnson some time and he can get these things passed.
Does that mean that they have to go back to the drawing board and write new appropriations bills?
For some of these with lawmakers, it does seem that that's going to be the only path forward. I caught up with Nick Svoboda from New York after the vote, and he had voted against the rule today. And it seems like for him and some of his fellow New York Republicans, they voted against the rule because they say that this bill will never become a law. It just contains some provisions that are never going to get past the Democratic Senate. Joe Biden's never going to sign it into law. So it seems like for a lot of these appropriations bills, they're going to have to go back through. They're going to have to rewrite them, or else, they're not going to get enough support from even enough House Republicans to kind of make its way through Congress.
The two-tiered continuing resolution, the temporary government funding bill to avoid the shutdown after this Friday, expected to pass the Senate. What's the status of the bills that will be in the first tranche? Where are they, and how much work will they need to do?
So for the two-tiered spending bill, it does seem that every single bill, depending on either deadline that you have, all of them are going to need some work. Because initially, when Johnson took the speakership earlier this month, he had a plan that he was going to get all of these passed through, and it seems that every single one has been yanked from the floor, doesn't have enough support. So it seems that regardless of which ones are going to be up first, they're all going to require some work, and they're all going to require some amending if they're going to want Republicans to vote, especially if they want any support from the Senate.
We're talking with Cami Mondo from the Washington Examiner. You touched on this a bit earlier. This problem of rules for bills going down on the House floor caused the ouster of the former speaker. But what we're hearing is that Speaker Johnson is not yet in trouble of losing his job. Is that true?
That is the sense that we're getting. So I caught up with a couple of the 8 Republicans who voted to oust McCarthy yesterday, kind of asking, with this CR that they passed, they obviously relied on more Democrats than they had Republicans. Same exact scenario that McCarthy faced. But what they are saying is that, it's not the same situation. I had caught up with Tim Burchett yesterday. He was one of the 8 Republicans who ousted McCarthy. And he kind of said the CR is for emergency situations, and that's what this situation that they've been proposed this week is. And so they're saying that, he's not at that point just yet. But with the failed rule vote on the floor today, that could be one of the ways that they're trying to retaliate, or kind of sending a message to Speaker Johnson, that he can't do the same kind of mistakes that McCarthy made. He'll just face a different kind of punishment.
But if he pursues these new spending bills at the levels that the conservative Republicans want, does he run into a problem that can't become law because it can't pass the Senate and can't be signed by the president?
It is likely that he's going to, no matter what, face a challenge, whether it's from House Republicans himself or with the Senate. So if he does move forward with the path of, the lower spending levels that McCarthy tried to face, it's likely that it's not going to get past the Senate. So Johnson's going to face some challenges when they come back next year, or even later this next month, that, he's going to face those same challenges of trying to appease conservatives in the House while also trying to propose legislation that is going to pass Congress. So it's not quite clear yet what that proposal Johnson will move forward will be, or whether conservatives will retaliate like they did against McCarthy. It's still a little unclear on, how that will all play out. But what is clear is that Johnson will have, a busy schedule, busy agenda, and he'll have to walk that line when he comes back.
A lot of reporting in the past couple of days about how tensions are running high on Capitol Hill. What have you seen?
So there have been a lot of tensions, especially in the last few days. We had seen a little altercation between Tim Burchett and Speaker McCarthy yesterday, where Burchett had said that McCarthy had shoved him in the hallway. You see a couple different hearings, especially like in the Senate, or between Comer and Jared Moskowitz yesterday. It just seems that, on this 10th or so week of straight session, lawmakers are getting a little bit antsy. They had their last recess in October canceled. And so I think they're just getting a little antsy and kind of need to take a step back, which may have been part of the reason why Republicans decided to adjourn early for their Thanksgiving recess. After the rule vote failed earlier this afternoon, they basically canceled votes for Wednesday evening and said, we're just going to go home. We'll come back after Thanksgiving and kind of see where we're at.
Cami Mondo is congressional reporter with the Washington Examiner. Find her stories at WashingtonExaminer.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said on the Senate floor this morning that he has filed cloture on proceeding to the House-passed continuing resolution. That's the procedural step to advance the bill, and that he'll work with Republicans to try to reach an agreement on moving the bill forward towards final passage soon. 60 votes will be needed to do that, and that's going to mean bipartisan support. Here's Senator Schumer.
Last night, the House of Representatives overwhelmingly passed a temporary extension of government funding into early next year. The vote in the House was 336 to 95, with 209 Democrats and 127 Republicans voting in favor. 93 Republicans voted against it. Shortly after the vote, I moved to place the House-passed bill on the Senate's legislative calendar, and I have just filed cloture on the motion to proceed to get this process moving in the Senate. Today, my Democratic colleagues and I will work with Republicans. I will work with Leader McConnell to see if we can come to an agreement to accelerate this bill's passage. If both sides cooperate, there's no reason we can't finish this bill even as soon as today, but we're going to keep working to see what's possible. Now, the House CR's bill is the House's CR is far from perfect, but we're moving forward because we believe it accomplishes two things that I and other Democrats have been insistent on for weeks. It will avoid a government shutdown, and it will do so without any of the cruel cuts or poison pills that the hard right pushed for. I think it was very important that Speaker Johnson recognized that Democratic votes are necessary to pass anything of significance in Congress. I reminded him every time I've spoken to him that we have to work in a bipartisan way to get anything done. And if he follows the clarion call of the hard right, whose views are far away from even the mainstream of his conference, let alone the American people or the Senate, that will lead to disaster. The same problems that we saw under Speaker Boehner, Speaker Ryan, and Speaker McCarthy.
The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, on the Senate floor. Republican Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky has already indicated he wants to offer an amendment to the temporary government funding extension. He posted, "I will oppose the CR and instead offer a CR with reduced spending levels." The Senate today also voting on whether to overturn President Biden's new student loan repayment plan called SAVE for Saving on a Valuable Education. Business Insider writes that the Education Department announced that 5.5 million student loan borrowers are now enrolled in the new SAVE income-driven repayment plan intended to lower monthly payments to borrowers. Per the department, 2.9 million of those borrowers now have $0 payments, and all other borrowers are saving an estimated $102 a month compared to other repayment plans based on data as of October 15th. The department also said in its press release that 75% of borrowers enrolled in SAVE also received a Pell Grant, which are grants low-income students can receive to fund their higher educations, and $300 billion in federal loans are in currently repayment through the SAVE plan. That was from Business Insider. Here's some of the debate on the Senate floor before the vote. The sponsor of the resolution to overturn the rule from the Education Department, Bill Cassidy, Republican from Louisiana.
This is not a benefit for those who are less well off. This is a benefit, a political payout to folks who have done quite well, precisely because they went to college. Under this rule, a majority of bachelor's degree student loan borrowers will not be expected to pay back even the principal. 91% of new student loan debt will be eligible for reduced payments subsidized by the taxpayers. Where is the forgiveness for the guy who didn't go to college but is working to pay off the loan on the truck he takes to work? What about the woman who paid off her student loans but either bought a less expensive home but is now struggling to afford the mortgage that she has? Is the administration providing them relief? No, nada. Of course not. Instead, the administration would have them not only pay their bills, but the bills of those who decided to go to college in order to make more money or who made a decision not to pay back their student loans so they could buy a bigger house. This is irresponsible. It is deeply unfair. And aside from being unfair, this student loan cancellation scheme does not address the root cause that created the debt in the first place. For example, President Biden's policy does not hold colleges or universities accountable for rising costs. In the last 30 years, tuitions and fees have jumped at private nonprofit colleges nonprofit colleges by 80%. At public four-year institutions, they've jumped 124%.
Senator Bill Cassidy, Republican from Louisiana, on the Senate floor on his bill that would overturn the new SAVE income-driven student loan repayment plan put in place by President Biden. Opposed to the Cassidy resolution, which means he wants the plan to stay in place, Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont.
This is what the president's plan does do. It cuts student loan payments in half for Americans who have taken out undergraduate loans. In fact, under the president's SAVE plan, student loan borrowers will be seeing their monthly payments reduced from 10% of their income down to just 5%. Further, the president's plan eliminates monthly student loan payments entirely for people who are earning less than $15 an hour. And it gives student loan borrowers the ability to wipe out or to substantially reduce their student loan debt over a 10-year period. Madam President, if Senator Cassidy's resolution is enacted, it would repeal President Biden's plan, and it would eliminate student debt relief for more than 5 million Americans who desperately need it. That would be absolutely unacceptable. Now, my Republican colleagues tell you that they want to repeal the president's student loan plan because it costs too much money. We just can't afford it. Well, I'm not going to deny that it does cost a lot of money. But what I find amusing is that when we are saying we need to help working class and lower income young people, what my Republican colleagues say, we can't afford to do that, but what we can do is vote to give away over $1 trillion in tax breaks to the top 1% large corporations when former President Trump was in office, without paying for it. No, we can't help young people with their student debt, but we can give tax breaks to the richest people in this country and large profitable corporations.
Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, on the Senate floor. Senate using the Congressional Review Act to try to overturn this federal regulation. And if it did pass and passed the House, President Biden has already said he would veto it. As we go to air, the vote in the Senate has been held open for about 3 hours. It stands at 49 yes and 50 no. Again, it's on a resolution that would overturn the new student loan repayment plan. Senator Tim Scott, Republican from South Carolina, has not voted, but even if he does show up and vote, it would be 50-50, and ties lose in the Senate, and Vice President Kamala Harris could break the tie and also make this lose. President Biden posting on X today, 2 years ago today, he writes, "I signed a once-in-a-generation investment in America's infrastructure and competitiveness, and since then we've been hard at work implementing this bill and getting America moving again, leaving no community behind." Today is the 2-year anniversary of the passage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And Senate Democrats celebrated with a news conference on Capitol Hill. Here is Debbie Stabenow of Michigan.
American communities are rebuilding their roads and bridges, expanding access to high-speed internet in rural communities as well as our big cities, and improving airports, and so much more, on and on and on. Let me tell you what this means for our country. 135,000 miles of roads are being improved. That would get you almost halfway to the moon, to put it in perspective.
Then what do we do?
I don't know. Then you got to turn around and come back. I don't know. That's a really good question. All right. 7,800 bridges are being repaired. 445 ports and waterway projects are being funded. 7 world-class regional clean hydrogen hubs are being launched, including one in Michigan that I'm so excited about. 1,200 communities will see drinking water and wastewater projects. 21 million families 21 million families are getting access to free or reduced high-speed internet, which is fundamentally changing the opportunity for children, for those families, and it's exciting. And thousands more students will have a clean and efficient ride to school aboard more than 2,200 electric school buses like the one right here that we're here to celebrate today. These investments aren't just improving lives and communities. They're creating millions of good-paying jobs, boosting American manufacturing, growing our middle class. House Republicans are trying to slash funding that will take away funds, transportation being less safe or less reliable and less convenient if those cuts happened. But meanwhile, Democrats are celebrating, breaking ground, thousands of projects that will improve people's lives.
Senator Debbie Stabenow, Democrat from Michigan, on Capitol Hill with other Senate Democrats on the second anniversary of the signing into law of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. An article from Up North News in Wisconsin begins, drivers inbound to downtown Milwaukee saw a new reminder Wednesday morning about the difference between talk and action when it comes to the roads and bridges they take to work. At 14 feet high and 48 feet long, the new billboard on I-794 at 6th Street gave commuters a simple message. While Donald Trump made Infrastructure Week a running joke, Joe Biden got infrastructure done for Wisconsin. The sign from the Democratic National Committee commemorates Wednesday's 2-year anniversary of Biden signing the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And there are also articles from around the country, other cities, with similar billboards. Wall Street today, the Dow up 163, NASDAQ up 9, S&P up 7. Washington today continues in a moment.
People often think C-SPAN is funded by the federal government. In fact, we're a nonprofit organization that receives no government funding. As news consumption changes, you can help ensure the future of C-SPAN's unfiltered coverage of national government and politics. We hope you'll consider making a tax-deductible contribution that will support our daily editorial operations. To learn more, visit cspan.org/donate.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you find your podcasts. Some headlines on Israel's war with Hamas from Reuters. Israeli troops found a command center and weapons and combat gear belonging to Palestinian Hamas militants in Gaza's biggest hospital on Wednesday, Israel's military said, in a campaign that stoked global alarm over the fate of civilians inside. It's referring to Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City. And also from Reuters, the United Nations Security Council on Wednesday called for urgent and extended humanitarian pauses in fighting between Israel and Palestinian Hamas militants in the Gaza Strip for a sufficient number of days to allow humanitarian aid access. The 15-member council overcame an impasse which saw 4 unsuccessful attempts to take action last month to adopt a resolution that also called for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages held by Hamas. The United States, Russia, and Great Britain, who are council members with veto power, abstained from Wednesday's vote on the resolution drafted by Malta. The remaining 12 members voted in favor. And from ABC News, since Hamas's surprise terror attack against Israel on October 7th, law enforcement has seen a rogues gallery of calls for attacks against the U.S. from Hezbollah to al-Qaeda, FBI Director Christopher Wray said Wednesday. The director testified for the U.S. House Homeland Security Committee.
On top of the so-called lone actor threat, we cannot and do not discount the possibility that Hamas or another foreign terrorist organization may exploit the current conflict to conduct attacks here on our own soil. We have kept our sights on Hamas and have multiple investigations into individuals affiliated with that foreign terrorist organization. And while historically our Hamas cases have identified individuals here who are facilitating and financing terrorism overseas, we continue to scrutinize our intelligence to assess how that threat may be evolving. But it's not just Hamas. As I highlighted for this committee in my testimony last year, Iran, the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism, has directly or by hiring criminals mounted assassination attempts against dissidents and high-ranking current and former U.S. officials, including right here on American soil. Or take Hezbollah, Iran's primary strategic partner, which has a history of raising money and seeking to obtain weapons here in the United States. FBI arrests in recent years also indicate that Hezbollah has tried to seed operatives, establish infrastructure, and engage in spying here, domestically, raising our concern that they may be contingency planning for future operations in the United States. And while we are not currently tracking a specific plot, given that disturbing history, we are keeping a close eye on what impact recent events may have on those terrorist groups' intentions here in the United States and how those intentions might evolve.
FBI Director Christopher Wray testifying before the U.S. House Homeland Security Committee. Also at the witness table, the Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas and Christine Abizaid, Director of the National Counterterrorism Center. Congressman August Pfluger, Republican from Texas, asked Director Wray and Secretary Mayorkas about terror threats and border security.
Mr. Chairman, we started this hearing by listening to Secretary Mayorkas talk about climate change as a threat to our country and obscure policies that need reauthorization, but not yet one mention of the southwest border and the 169 plus known or suspected terrorists that have entered this country. So I think it just shows you where the mindset is, and the American people know that. Director Wray, you said in front of the Senate committee last week, and you said again today, the reality is that terrorism threat has been elevated throughout 2023, but the ongoing war in the Middle East has raised the threat of an attack against Americans in the United States to a whole other level. Do you stand by that statement?
Absolutely.
If somebody is listed as a special interest alien or a KST, by the way, this is Trump-era KSTs, and this is Mayorkas-Biden-era KSTs. If somebody's listed as a KST, is that a concerning person, somebody who could do harm to the United States?
Well, to be on the watch list as a KST means that they've met the standard to be of concern.
So they're concerning to the FBI. You're looking for these people.
Yes.
Are there people that are listed in these numbers? I think the number was 169. They may have amended that from CBP DHS, but are there people that you are still searching for that we don't know where they are in the United States? Of the known apprehensions, KSTs, known or suspected terror people, match list to the terror watch list.
Well,
are you still searching for people in the United States that we know match the terror watch list?
I'm not sure I can answer that here because it's a constantly moving target.
Director A,
yes.
Are there people that match the terror watch list that were apprehended by CBP that the FBI and other agencies are searching for in the United States?
There are certainly individuals who are the subject of terrorism investigations that we are searching for.
Are there
Whether or not they're people, to me, I guess the distinction I'm drawing is, well, there's obviously a lot of focus on the watch list itself. One of the things that, and I've tried to be clear in my testimony here this morning, one of the areas that we are of concern is individuals who, once here, information later comes in.
Are there people that you don't? Are there people you don't know where they are that the FBI is searching for today?
Yes.
Yes or no? Yes. Secretary Mayorkas, is there a policy at DHS that requires CBP or any other agency involved with the vetting of individuals who match the terror watch list that requires these individuals to be detained? Does DHS have a policy of detainment for anybody who matches the terror watch list?
Congressman, on September 30th of 2021, I promulgated a policy that articulated quite clearly and quite expressly that individuals who pose a threat to the public safety.
Is there a policy at DHS and CBP that requires detainment of people who match the terror watch list? It's very simple.
That individuals who pose a threat to public safety or national security are a priority for enforcement, and if in fact
is every person that you have listed on the terror watch list detained right now?
And if in fact they pose such a threat, they are to be detained.
Okay, so why did you release people in the United States that match the terror watch list?
Congressman, we do not release individuals.
So you have detained every single person who matched the terror watch list that you apprehended at the southern border? 100%.
If you would allow me to answer the question.
Please answer it quickly. I don't need a filibuster.
If we believe that the detention of an individual is necessary to safeguard the safety of the American people, we continue to detain.
Secretary, I'm going to reclaim my time. If you and any other agency labels somebody as a match to the terror watch list, do you immediately detain them?
Congressman, if you are referring to the terrorist screening data set, the TSDS, we make a determination in the execution of our law enforcement responsibilities to detain an individual if that detention is
I believe that based on your testimony, based on Director Ray's, that there are people that you're still searching for that you should have detained, and I want to find out more information on it.
Congressman August Pfluger, Republican from Texas, questioning Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas and FBI Director Christopher Wray before the Homeland Security Committee. You can find the full hearing on our website at cspan.org. BBC News on today's Prime Minister's Question Time in the British House of Commons writes that Prime Minister Rishi Sunak told MPs the government was already working on a new treaty with Rwanda to address the concerns of the Supreme Court after it ruled the plan to send some asylum seekers to the country was unlawful. And Prime Minister Sunak was pressed on his decision to appoint former Prime Minister David Cameron as Foreign Secretary, with MPs raising his association with the Greensill scandal and former role with a China-UK investment fund. Here's the Prime Minister talking about immigration.
This morning also the Supreme Court gave a judgment on the Rwanda plan. They confirmed that the principle of removing asylum seekers to a safe third country is lawful. There are further elements that they want additional certainty on, and noted that changes can be delivered in the future to address those issues. The government has been working already on a new treaty with Rwanda, and we will finalise that in light of today's judgment. And furthermore, if necessary, I am prepared to revisit our domestic legal frameworks. Let me assure the House, my commitment to stopping the boats is unwavering.
British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak of the Conservative Party at Prime Minister's Questions. And here's the exchange between him and Labour leader Keir Starmer on former Prime Minister David Cameron being named the new Foreign Secretary.
The Prime Minister obviously thinks so little of his own MPs that he's had to peel David Cameron away from his 7-year exile in a shepherd's hut and make him Foreign Secretary. But a few months ago, the Intelligence and Security Committee said that the now Foreign Secretary's role in a Chinese investment fund may have been, and this is their words, engineered by the Chinese state. I hardly need to remind the Prime Minister of the threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party or the intimidation against members of this House. So when will he instruct the Foreign Secretary to give full public disclosure of his work for Chinese interests?
Mr. Speaker, as I said, I'm delighted that the former Prime Minister has rejoined government as Foreign Secretary. As an individual with unrivalled experience, he will help Britain navigate an uncertain world in challenging times. Of course, like every other government minister, he will go through the normal process with the independent advisor. But the government's position on China is clear. China represents an epoch-defining challenge. That's why we have taken strong and robust steps to protect ourselves against the risk that it poses. But we'll take no lessons, Mr. Speaker, from the Labour Party on protecting our national security. They've taken almost £700,000 from an alleged Chinese agent.
British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak at Prime Minister's Questions. David Cameron, the new Foreign Secretary, was Prime Minister from 2010 through 16. And this from The Guardian newspaper in Great Britain. They write, Chinese state media have welcomed the appointment of former Prime Minister David Cameron as UK's Foreign Secretary as opponents of Beijing raise concerns about the return of a figure closely associated with the golden era of UK-China relations. And finally, on Washington Today, a lighthearted moment on the U.S. presidential campaign trail. Chris Christie, Republican candidate and former New Jersey governor, was the featured speaker today at the Hudson Institute in Washington, which has been holding a series of events with presidential candidates focusing on foreign policy. Chris Christie considered the others who have already been there, and he said he was not sure he wanted to be in that company.
Well, good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for coming today. John, I appreciate the invitation. I'm happy to be here, although when I heard the list of people who have been here already, wondering if you guys are a jinx. Pence is out, Scott's out, Bergen was never really in, and Ramaswamy's crazy. So, I'm hoping to break your streak here, John.
Republican presidential candidate Chris Christie today at the Hudson Institute in Washington, D.C. It was the start of what was a very serious and sometimes sober discussion about foreign policy, including the wars between Israel and Hamas and Russia and Ukraine. C-SPAN covered it, and you can find the video at cspan.org. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word. It's free, and get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.